Welcome to Beyond Movement Project. My name is Matthew Philly, husband, father, entrepreneur, and it's my mission to bring you people who are doing incredible things that will help you reach your next level. Join me as I look beyond movement to discover how we can become the most powerful version of ourselves. Let's go. What is up, Beyond Movers? Today, I'll be bringing you through my conversation with an elite triathlete that changed the game for women. Back in 2012, she became the first woman to ever win the 70.3, which is half Ironman, and win the Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii in the same year. Not only that, these races were within 6 weeks of one another. I can't even begin to explain to you how intense that actually is. We talk about how mentally grueling it can be to perform at such a high level and feel as though you have to live up to a certain standard, how she hated her training at times but continued to push through, and one of the biggest things that she has done her entire athletic career that has helped her be so successful from the time she was 14 until retirement. Here's a little hint. It had to do with what she would tell herself during and before her races. Join me as we go behind the mind of an elite athlete. This is episode 5 with Leanda Cave. So Leanda Cave, welcome to the Beyond Movement Project. I'm super stoked to have you here. I'm personally myself starting to get into triathlon training. So this is an exciting conversation that I know that I've been looking forward to for sure. You've been an accomplished triathlete for, I think your career span was around 18 years or so. I think that's what you were telling me. And again, a lot of accomplishments, and you had a very successful career as well. So you've been retired since 2018, and I'm curious what life has been like since retirement after 18 years of consistently just pushing for the next goal, the next goal, the next goal. And yesterday when we had our first conversation, you were telling me that, there's an HBO special that was just released called The Weight of Gold, and they're talking about kind of the post, what would you call that? Post athletic career depression symptoms that high level athletes get. And you were mentioning that you did not struggle with that. So I'm curious, kind of what's the process been like for you since retirement, and how have you been going through that?
Oh, Matt, super psyched to be on it and chat with you. So retirement for me, I was ready. Let's just say that. I was ready mentally, probably more so than physically, even though physically I wasn't as able to do like the training and racing at the same level that I used to do when I was younger. But mentally I was kind of toast, like I was fried. And I think for a few reasons mentally I was like kind of done. But I think that kind of contributed to like just my attitude around retiring. I was tired of waking up to an alarm every morning. And that was the one thing that really made me so happy when I retired. I just stopped putting the alarm on, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to sleep in. So for the first 6 months, there was no alarm. I was barely working out. And then I couldn't fit in any of my clothes. I'm like, oh, we need to do something about this. So then I just said, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of something every day. So that's kind of been, since retiring, my routine. I just do something every day. I don't have any sort of schedule or plan, or I just make sure I do something every day. I just kind of honor myself that way and make that commitment. But yeah, the mental side, I struggled with the idea of retiring for 5 years, actually. Because I had, like you said, the best year of my life or my career in 2012, and I actually was done. That year I could have retired. Like I could have been done. I was, at that point, I was so, I just was tired of hurting. I was tired of the training, the pushing myself mentally, physically, waking up, having no sleep. And I just felt like I could have retired after that, but I didn't, because, when you win such a prestigious race, or a couple of races like I did in 2012, off the back of that, it's kind of the time to capitalize and, strike while the iron's hot. And I just kept going, kept racing, kept training. And I did have a really severe injury in 2013, which kind of put the brakes on a lot of things, but I still thought, well, I don't want to retire on this year, like on 2013 with this injury. So, I kept going for another few years. And before I knew it, it was like 2017. And I'm like, this has to be it. Like this, I have to stop at the end of this year. It was also, I was just shy of my 40th birthday. And I'm like, you know what? I think it's time I let the young kids, take the honors and, pass the baton on to them, sort of thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed the idea of retiring. And since then, I mean, what have I done? I mean, I feel like my ideal retirement was, what I really wanted to do was just take off everything, like stop, just kind of put my feet up for a little while and not have to think about income or where I'm living or what I'm doing. But it wasn't the case. The thing with retiring from sport is, like, I had, some set income from sponsors, some endorsements and things like that. And then I retire and I have nothing. Like, I don't have income from from racing. I don't have income from my sponsorship contracts. And so I was like, I really kind of need to work. So, and I knew that was coming. I kind of planned out the exit strategy a couple of years before I retired, where I was just going to kind of fall into the coaching role. So I'd set all that up, and I was actually coaching in the last couple of years of my career anyway. And so that's kind of what I fell into. And I wouldn't say that's kind of my long-term kind of plan. It never was, but it was just easy to have that, because I think a lot of athletes, when they retire, they haven't thought about that. They haven't thought about the idea of, like, okay, what do I do now? Like, or when I do decide to stop, like, what's my follow on? What can I do next? And it's I think that's why a lot of athletes are lost, are depressed, because all of a sudden you've gone from having these daily goals, these training goals, where you get up in the morning, you do your training, you have this routine around training, and then you have something that you're set up to race, a goal down the road where you're training for something, that you're kind of driven for, and then all of a sudden you have nothing. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest pitfall with athletes who, retires. It's like, there's just nothing all of a sudden, so that's where I feel like, for me, I think I planned it out well enough. I think I was mentally in a really good place to stop. And, I had lined things up to be almost like busy in a way, but also goal driven. I had athletes that I had to take care of.
Yeah. And it's funny when we, like, not necessarily funny, but when we talk about the impact that has on an athlete's mentality and mindset, it's almost like they're no longer in the limelight. They no longer have all that attention on them. And that in itself can be somewhat addicting in a way, right? Even if you're not someone that generally enjoys attention, it can still somewhat feel addicting. And it almost replaces a sense of, like, caring, like people care about you a little bit more just because you have that attention, right? So it's almost like going from 100 back down to 0, like a full stop right after the career. Like, the attention isn't on you anymore. And that, I feel like that's where a big sense of that weight that a lot of athletes carry after their career comes from, is that sense of no longer feeling like they're important or like they matter. Although that's obviously the farthest thing from the truth. I feel like personally, that's a big factor for a lot of athletes. But one thing I wanted to do was kind of jump back, because you were mentioning, your most incredible year, the pinnacle of your career was 2012. I kind of wanted to highlight the fact that you won the Ironman Worlds in Kona, and then you also won, or I guess it was reverse order. You won 70.3 half Ironman, and then you won Ironman in Kona 5 weeks later or something like that, I believe. And you were the first woman in the history of the sport to complete that. So I wanted to highlight that and explain to the audience what we're referring to when we talk about your career in 2012. And then also to know that you were ready to, like, you would have been happy to retire at that time or prior to that. So how does that happen where you feel like you're just done and then you go and have the most incredible career? Do you feel like there was something, there was like a silver lining there that just kind of pushed you forward and made you somehow want to perform the best in your career? Or is that always kind of your mindset? Like, what happened there that you went from, as we were talking about previously, injuries in 2011, injuries in 2012, or illnesses in 2012, and then again you had a bunch of stuff going on in your life at this time, and then that mindset of not really being fully present and fully there and fully committed, and then going to complete, and an incredible accomplishment like that. What happened? How does that work?
I'm gonna delve into like the personal side, because I think that's played a huge role in
Mm-hmm.
what happened. So I was coming out of a 10-year relationship, and all of a sudden I have all this time on my hands to like train. I was also enjoying life for the first time in a long time, like doing fun things, going to places. I had no responsibility for somebody else, and I just took care of me, and that kind of, I think, lent itself to just kind of giving me this kind of open book to like write whatever I want in it. Like I could do whatever I want whenever I want. And so I did. Like I was able to train. I could sleep. I didn't have to like run around or take care of somebody else or think about somebody else. I just really was thinking about myself. And that was like really refreshing for me, and opened up, a lot of time for me just to like train and just be the athlete that I should have been for a long time before that. I think even just concentrating on myself and my job. So that's kind of what I feel lent itself hugely to that particular kind of transition, where I was just like, I got into the best shape of my life. I had a great year in 2011 where I came third in Kona. Off the back of that, I just kept like pushing, and that momentum just kept running. And that's when my relationship ended, and I just kept rolling with it. And then in 2012, I was in pretty good shape all the way up until I think you mentioned like the injury I had, where I had this back injury, and I came down with it. I think it was kind of late May. And it was pretty bad, and I never had it diagnosed. I never had a scan or MRI or anything on it. It was just I just started seeing a chiropractor, and I was at the point where I couldn't actually walk. I was struggling to walk from my car to my chiropractor's office. This is when I was in Arizona, in Tucson, and I was taped up. I had tape all over my back, and I remember I was at least for 6 weeks where I could barely walk. And I remember I mentioned this earlier. I remember the time vividly, because it was 4th of July in Tucson, Arizona, super hot. I had my house on the golf course, and I had this like flat roof, and had some friends over. And at this point, I'm like, this year's going to be a complete wash. So I decided to let my hair down, have some fun. So we put like a kid's paddle pool on my roof. We had like this big party on my roof, and I'm sitting in the paddle pool, and I have just like this, kinesiology tape all over my back. and that's why I remember, like, that's when it was. And that's when I feel like I was kind of just coming out of the injury. I was starting to get better. And I remember having a lot of fun that year, despite everything. And then the time when I hadn't run for 6 weeks. I went to see some friends in New York, and I did my first run in 6 weeks around Central Park. And it was quite funny, because there was this woman who passed me and my friend as we're running very slowly, and she was kind of a bigger woman. And she's like, "Come on, guys, you've got this. And I was like, "Really? You don't have any idea." I was kind of like, it was nice, I guess, a nice gesture for her to encourage us. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, I'm not where I normally am right now, but thanks. And then after that, like I just started getting into this, like, I don't know, enjoyment of training. Like I was just really, really enjoying training. I was going out. I spent the summer in Boulder in Colorado, and essentially I was there on my own. I would train. I had some friends, but they weren't training partners or anything. So I'd just go out training on my own, and I just loved it. It was my first time ever training in Colorado, and I was exploring, and I was just having so much fun. I had no gauge as to how fast or slow I was going. I had my power meter on my bike, and obviously my Garmin watch, which, you know, gave me paces and things like that. But I was never really able to see how I measured up to other athletes in training. So I think that was also a really, really great thing for me at the time, because I was never comparing myself. I just went and did what I wanted to do or had to do, whatever my coach prescribed me. I would just get out and do it, and there was just no stress. It was just like I just could fit training in my own schedule, and it was just like such an easy, fun time for me as an athlete. And yeah, and I think that was also like just not having people around, and I'd stopped putting limits on myself, right? I was just doing, like, if I go hard, I went as hard as I could, or, you know, like given certain efforts. And I think when you train with other people, like you're always sitting there and kind of like, you know, eyeing them off. But for me, it was like, I didn't have that. So I would just train, and I think I did some of the best training of my career just because I didn't have anybody around me.
That is so interesting, because I know we had a conversation and we were discussing the fact that for the most part in your career, you did not enjoy training. So one of my questions for you is actually, how do you become one of the most elite triathletes in the world, in the history of the sport, and not enjoy the process of training? But I kind of want to jump before I ask that question and kind of ask you if you think that 2012 was such a great experience for you simply because you had that joy within your training for what seems like once in your career. Do you think
Yeah.
that was like the biggest factor for you?
I mean, I had joy in my training. I had joy in my life. I was in a relationship that was very depressing, and then when I came out of that, I realized how happy I was, you know. And so I enjoyed having this, you know, new lease of life, if you like. And I think that kind of transcended into the training, and that's why I started really enjoying my training as well. It stopped being a chore. It was just like, I want to do it. I want to go out. And also being in Colorado, I mean, I live here now, and it's just like, it's such a inviting place to go. Like, you wake up every day and you want to just get into the mountains. You want to go out and train. It was actually a very kind of good time to be in Colorado for me, like coming off the back of, you know, this relationship, and then, you know, being in such a beautiful place. So I think that also added to the training, like the enjoyment of training. But yeah, there was definitely years where I didn't enjoy training, and definitely also in the latter part of my career where I didn't enjoy the training. And I think the reason I trained so hard and so well was because I freaking loved racing. I mean, for me, like, if I could step on the start line and have a great race, that was like that's just what kept me going. That's what like fed the, you know, the desire to wake up in the morning and train, you know. And that's that whole thing, you know, I mentioned earlier about having goals. I mean, I was just wanting to race, and anyone who knows me, like, I was an athlete who like knew how to turn up on a big day, you know. Like, I wouldn't always have great races in the smaller events, but put a world championship in front of me, and then I'm like a different athlete. And so yeah, I love that. I loved competition. I mean, even from a really, really young age, I just remember I just wanted to compete and race people, you know. And that kind of why I feel like the training was more of a means to something that I really enjoyed to do.
I love that. So as you said, you were an athlete that knew how to show up on a big day. And you said actually that you felt like you didn't compete as well, or potentially wouldn't compete as well on the smaller events. So what do you think it was for those big events that made you like tap into something that wasn't necessarily there for those shorter events? Was it because you felt like they weren't as important, and you know, you really knew how to kind of bring everything together for those events that you knew were going to make a difference in your career? What is up, Beyond Movers? I just wanted to hop in here quickly to say that I'm so stoked that you're listening in on this conversation. I always do my best to pull interesting and powerful information from my guests to give you an opportunity to learn from the best. If you're enjoying this episode of Beyond Movement, I would love to hear what you think, and it would mean the world to me if you would leave an honest review. Tell us what you're enjoying, what you think, and I will continue to bring you the greatest minds that I can get my hands on. Don't forget to take a screenshot and post this in your Instagram stories and tag us at matthew.j.philly and beyondmovement.project so we know you're listening in. Okay, so let's get back to this conversation. And as always, let's go.
I think I loved competition. Like I wanted to see the best people turn up, and I wanted to measure up to them. I wanted to be able to race and be competitive against them. And I don't know, maybe it's something from childhood, who knows, but I feel like from a young age, like I had people who didn't really believe in me, or would always kind of say, oh, you're not good enough or whatever. And I think, it's kind of when I turn up to those big races, it's kind of me showing the world that, yeah, I'm freaking good enough. You watch me. I'm going to like crush it. And you do your words. So I guess that's kind of where I come from. It's just kind of my kind of mental way of keeping myself in check at big races. And I really enjoyed like when athletes would turn up and they're nervous as hell, and you can see it like at the race briefings, or even when you're like turning up to the start line, and I was really excited to race. Like I was like really wanting to like lay it down. And I think because again, like I didn't always enjoy the training. I didn't always enjoy the process, and I loved the racing so much. It was like kind of the day to kind of celebrate all that, hard work that I put in. And I called racing my dance floor, because, no one sees all the training you do. You just do it all. Like for me, I did so much on my own. No one gets to kind of experience what you're doing in training, but then on race day, like you get to show it all off. And that was also kind of fun. That, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm weird that way, who knows? But that's kind of how I like kind of felt on race days when they came around.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that though. Like you're kind of using that fuel from your childhood as, from people telling you you're not good enough, or whatever they were saying at that time, that you kind of, that's how you were taking it, was you're not good enough at that time. I notice a lot that that will either fuel people or it will hinder them in their success. So people will either listen to it or use it and try to show the world that they have no idea what the hell they're talking about, and you're going to show them, eat their words, as you said, right? I know that you were, I believe it was around 14 years old when you started your triathlon career, or like getting involved in the scene at least, and your sister was already involved in the scene and already racing and stuff like that. Was she a big part of, your initial, what is the words I'm looking for? The initial excitement in terms of the sport itself, or was that kind of something that you would have developed on your own, that you think?
Well, my sister and I were very different personalities. Like I was an introvert. I was very shy, barely spoke a word when I was a kid. My sister was the opposite. Like she always had boyfriends. She always had fun. She was always socializing. And so I kind of looked up to my sister in a way. As like, if I do what she does, maybe I'll be popular, maybe I'll be cool, and she would do a sport and I'd be like, all right, I'm going to do that sport. And it kind of frustrated her, because athletically I was probably more gifted than her. And as soon as I pick up a sport that she did, I wouldn't be long before I was beating her. So I kind of found it
I'm sure she loved that.
following her around doing these sports that she was trying to, be, good at. And we started with, like, we were doing all sorts when we were kids. Like we went from, gymnastics, I was terrible, tennis, squash, you name it. We did every sport. And then we finally got into like surf lifesaving. when we moved to well, actually probably Perth when we were there, and then later in Cairns, where we ended up going to high school. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I was good at it. But it was always like a sport that you would do seasonally. And then in the winter, there was like triathlon. And so my sister, she started doing triathlon before I did, like with school. And I was kind of in awe of her. I was like, oh my gosh, how does she swim that far? And how does she ride a bike that far? And oh my gosh, running 5K. Wow. And I was just kind of mesmerized by what my sister had accomplished. And I was like, I think I can do that one day. I think I'm going to try it. And then my first one, I tried it and I did beat her. And she's like, you stick to triathlon. I'm going to do surf life saving. It was kind of like she kind of put that sport on me, and she's like, I'm going to stick to my surf life saving. I was like, great.
So it sounds like there was a little bit of that competitive edge that you got kind of came from that initial time with your sister in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, it was, my goal wasn't to beat my sister. My goal was to be the best, and I really wanted to win. Like I remember I used to chant to myself we used to live right near this lake in Cairns called Lake Placid, where they used to hold all the triathlons. They actually don't hold them anymore there because there's crocodiles in the lake apparently. But back when I was doing triathlon there, I just walked down to the race start, right? And I would go on my own because at this point my sister's she doesn't want to do triathlon because I was beating her. And I would walk down to the race and I would chant to myself, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to win. And this is like, I'm honestly like that self-talk, which I didn't experience. No one taught, kind of developed it very young. And I would just kind of like talk to myself and like start talking myself into this role of like winning a race. And yeah, I would win.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you, where do you get this? Where did this work ethic come from? And that obviously that self-talk is something that a lot of people have to learn, because most people have a negative self-talk. And you kind of, since the beginning, utilize the completely opposite force. Like you would use that positive self-talk to help you get to that next level and approach your like ultimate peak of fitness, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, I had definitely a lot of people who were more telling me what I couldn't do than what I could do. And I guess, I don't know, I just decided to show them like what I could do. And so I guess that mindset where, I wanted to created the book where I'm like, do well and achieve good results. And the work ethic, I mean, that comes just, I didn't have many friends. I was such a shy, isolated kid. And, like my parents, they decided to travel around Australia and do we went from school to school to school, and I never really had like self-esteem or confidence. But the only thing that like my esteem was taught, and that kind of gave me my my ticket, or that was my currency to being popular, if you like, or recognized, or just having a voice. And so for me, like I performed in sport, and it wasn't in schoolwork. I was a smart kid, but I never really like kind of put really much emphasis on being an academic person. I had like no friends. So for me, it was just like, I'm just going to train my ass off and just like show the world who I am.
So that's interesting. So throughout your career, like as you were younger, you said that first kind of race, you were telling yourself, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to win. And then you go out and you do, right? Is that something that you were carrying on throughout your entire career? Would you always go to a race saying similar things to yourself? Like, would you have specific mantras, or what would you tell yourself to kind of, I know that you didn't enjoy your training all that much, but to keep you moving forward during those times where you clearly weren't all that happy in your training and in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I really developed that self-talk in a way that helped me throughout my career. And it's funny because like people, I mean, not all people, but some athletes would be like, oh my gosh, they'd be so nervous. And like the thing for me, I always went in thinking I'm going to win. Like that's that's like the best case scenario. And whatever happens, like I always wanted to get to the top. Like the top of the mountain was my goal. So that's always where I was shooting for, right? And I think a lot of people just shoot somewhere in between. Like they don't shoot for like the top. They shoot for like maybe halfway or 3/4 of the way because they don't believe they can be at the top. And I'm like, someone's got to be at the top. So why not at least like start there and then see what happens along the way? So for me, that's kind of where I was always shooting for. I went to every race thinking I was going to win. And it didn't always work. It didn't always pan out that way. But I mean, I always thought that at least that puts me in the best position mentally, like to start, rather than thinking, oh, I'm just going to finish top 10. Like I was like, no, I'm going to win. You know, one of my first, sorry, I'm going to kind of divert here, but I won my first world championship that I won was in Cancun. It was the ITU World Championship in 2002. And I remember my coach at the time, his name was Chris Jones. And he's like, Leanda, what's your goal for the race? And I was like, well, I'm going to win. And he's like, oh, no, like, how about we set like a realistic goal, like something not, you know. And I was like, in my head, I was like, really? You don't think I can win? And I was like, okay, top 5. But in my head, I'm like, I'm going to win. And I won, actually. But it was so funny because like that's who I was. Like that was I'm going to win. And I was definitely like earlier on a very arrogant athlete that way. But at the same time, I think I had to be, you know?
Yeah, I feel like that's a powerful characteristic that a lot of successful people have. They just believe in themselves to begin with, and they, again, like arrogant or not, it's something that can drive you to success, and it clearly has for you, right? Like if you were instead telling yourself like, oh, today I'm not feeling all that great, I didn't sleep that well, I'll be content with 10th place or whatever, right? Do you think you would have had that same career that you've had? I personally don't believe that. In my mind, I'm so confident that a lot of the success comes from what we tell ourselves on an ongoing basis, because we believe ourselves, right? We are basically what we tell ourselves on the most frequent basis. So if you're telling yourself on a daily basis, or when you're approaching the race and you're telling yourself, I'm going to win, and that's what you're shooting for, you're not going to be content with giving 99%. You're only going to be content with giving 100% throughout the entire race, right? So I'm a firm believer that that's something that's pushed you to become who you are as an athlete, and all your successes as an athlete as well. I think that's one of the recipe or ingredients in your recipe.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you know, like as an athlete, and I think that's also why I've been okay, like with retiring, because like my identity wasn't tied up in like who I was as an athlete, because I had like for me, it was my identity as an athlete was about racing and trying to win, as opposed to like, I am this, you know, this person that, you know, I felt like I had that ability to kind of just switch that off once I retired, you know?
Yeah, 100%. So now that you are retired and you're focusing more on coaching and other endeavors and ventures that you're working on now, which all seem to be fairly related to athletics in some form, do you feel like you're enjoying your training more now, simply because there's maybe less stress involved, maybe less requirements on your end when it comes to the training? You can actually focus on just enjoying it. Is that a process for you now where you actually enjoy?
Because like what I do right now is not training at all.
Okay.
I don't look at pace or power or anything. I just go out and I just like it. I'm finding that just so joyful, right? Like it's the process now of just like going out and not having numbers and goals and things like that. That's what I really, really enjoy. Whereas it's so funny because that's what brought me so much joy at one point, is just like having like, you know, these pinnacle races to aim for and whatever. Now I'm like, it's so funny how much I've shifted from being like this goal orientated athlete to like being now I'm like, just like going to go for a 30-minute run and squeeze it in. Or I don't have that drive. But I think a lot of it too is just, you know, that I put my body through a lot. Like I hurt myself on a daily basis training. Like there was no question. I was like pushing myself to my limits every day. And I noticed my check every now and then. I'll run, and my head will be like, oh my gosh, this is so, I'm hurting. And then I have this other voice in my head, like, slow down, Leanda, you don't need to be hurting anymore. Like you should be enjoying this. So I do, like, I'm like, I've got these two little voices and they go back and forth, but still, you know, sometimes competitive. I'll go ride with some of the boys and, you know, they'll attack and I'll have to like chase it down. And because that's just, there's something still ingrained in me in that a competitive sense, but not to the like point where I want to hurt myself.
Yeah, you've been an athlete for your whole life. I don't think you're ever going to lose that competitive edge that you have. I think it's legitimately ingrained in who you are at this point, that there's always some level of competitiveness, right? Whether that's with yourself or with somebody else, like I think there's always going to be that level. Do you feel like you know, not as a competitive athlete, do you feel like you're going to eventually get back into racing again at any point?
You know, I've toyed with the idea. I mean, I'm calling myself a participant. I'm not a I'm not a racer anymore. I've done like a variety of different things. I've done some bike events, several marathons. I'm just not like, I actually did a triathlon in a team. I'm just a participant. I'll turn up and I'm like enjoying just going slow and not having to hurt, but like being part of an event. Like that's kind of what I'm enjoying right now. In terms of like maybe doing a triathlon again one day, like a whole thing, sure. I'm doing enough working out that I could easily slip to a triathlon and do it. Am I ready for that? I'm not sure. I mean, the triathlon scene, it was such a huge part of my life for so long. It's been nice not to actually think about that for, you know, since retiring. It was so consuming. And I mean, I related that to like work, right? For so long, for such a huge part of my life, I was a triathlete as a job. Like that was who I was. And so I still kind of relate doing a triathlon as work.
Right. Okay. So in terms of fitness, do you have any goals that you're kind of looking to achieve now? Again, like that could be anything in terms, so nothing competitive. So in terms of like hiking a specific mountain or something like that, is there anything like that that you kind of have your eyes set that you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, that was, you know, some of the things I've been doing have not been events or races. I've just been going out. Like a few weeks ago, I did a 220-mile bike ride, the longest ride I've ever done in my life. I ran the rim to rim to rim in the Grand Canyon. I was actually going to be doing the English Channel in a relay. So, you know, just these things. I then I like, oh, I want to climb up that. I think I'm more driven to like doing something that kind of has a little bit more endurance around it than simply, well, I mean, climbing a mountain for some people is a big deal, but for me, it's like,
Right.
yeah, I need a little, maybe 10 mountains, you know, something. But yeah, I just feel like I want to feel like I'm doing something that's a, like kind of, if I use the word epic, that would probably sum it up. Like something that kind of a one and done, but like something big and memorable, you know?
Just kind of sets the soul on fire in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has your training changed much since you've, well, again, we kind of just spoke about that, but like, are you in terms of, are you doing more weight training at this point, or is it still a lot of endurance stuff, cardiovascular stuff?
I mean, I'm an endurance queen. I just love just going out. I can, yeah, be on my bike all day. If I had the time, I would. But I try and do like a couple of HIIT workouts a week just to maintain, you know, muscle strength. And because I noticed like when I retired, like I lost a lot of muscle, especially upper body muscle. And I just lost the functionality of doing some things which I used to find so easy. And so I find like doing like hit getting some cardio out of it as well has helped a lot for me. And they're kind of punishing. I mean, I kick my own ass.
Yeah, they can be absolutely brutal, right? Okay, so I have one final question for you, because you're somebody that's insanely accomplished and has done some like incredible things and has always seemed to have big goals on the go for such a long period of time and has accomplished those goals. So I'm curious what you think, and this is something I ask all my guests. What do you think separates high performers from those who don't reach their goals? If you had to choose one thing, what would you want to tell the audience that you believe separates those that are achieving their goals from those who aren't?
I would say time. And I don't know if that's something like that people really understand, but I feel like people don't give themselves enough time to be that athlete or be that person. My career is 18 years. I mean, come on, like if I quit after I've achieved half the goals that I achieved, right? So for me, I would say you've got to like put the time in and commit to time. And I think in this generation, like everything's like so fast moving, like we want things to happen yesterday. But it takes time to develop as an athlete, and it takes time to also, reach those goals, and you kind of got to work your way up. And I feel like when I've seen athletes retire or quit, they were just that close. If they just put in a little bit more time, just 1 or 2 more years, they would have been like, where I was. So I feel like for me, it's time. Like give yourself the time and runway to be the athlete that you want to be.
Yeah, I love that. So time, like be more patient, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't have or just aren't willing to give at the moment, right? It's like they say that most entrepreneurs will drop off within the 5-year mark simply because people just aren't willing to give it more than that 5 years, right? And it takes constant effort to get to that point as well. So I love that, and I totally vibe with that as well.
Yeah, like anything that's for me like coming up, I mean, I'm willing to put the time in. I'm not expecting things to happen fast. If they do, great, but yeah. That's just what I was with my career and the gifts that I've been given along the way.
Yeah, again, your career spanned for 18 years, so you clearly did put the time in on your end to get to where you were, right? It wasn't until however many years in, I'm pretty sure 10 plus years in, that you achieved the best defining year in your career, right? So I totally love that. So again, Leanda, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was really, really cool. And it's always nice to learn from people who are pushing to their absolute limit to really understand what it takes to get to that point for those who haven't been there quite yet. So thanks again for coming. It was awesome.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed the interview. Your questions are great. I'm super happy. Thank you.
Hello. I wanted to say a huge thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to sit through this conversation with me. It's honestly my mission to bring you the greatest minds and pull some epic information from them to help you view your life through the lens of thought leaders and game changers. We're on a daily journey to be one step ahead of who we were yesterday, and I am excited to have you right here to walk this road with me. One of my goals is to help more people take control over their success and their daily lives. And one of the best ways to do this is with your reviews. This helps us rank the show to get it in front of more people. So if you enjoyed this episode and you have a quick moment, it would honestly mean the world to me if you would leave a review and comment about what you liked and maybe even who you want to see on the next show. Don't forget to put the tools you learned through this episode to practice, and I will see you next episode. Let's go.